It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Philippa Corey to you, and she's given me permission to call her Pippa, and I think that permission extends to everyone else too. She's the consultant medical oncologist and affiliated associate professor at the University of Cambridge. She is also with NIHR, the National Institute of Health and Care Research, Cancer National Specialty and Vaccines Research Program co-lead. She is also part of NIHR's Clinical Research Network, National Specialty Lead for Cancer, both late phase and international trials, and finally, co-founder and trustee of the UK Melanoma Focus charity. Dr. Corey is recognized nationally and internationally as a leading melanoma and pancreatic cancer specialist and has extensive clinical trials experience working as chief investigator for both academic and commercial sponsored trials. Dr. Corey, who I think was beautifully introduced in the two previous presentations as being a hero, will share lessons learned pre-COVID in cancer that were taken forward and applied to the National Institute for Health and Care Research sponsored recovery trial. She will also share lessons learned in the recovery trial and how they're being applied to advance precision medicine and the new cancer vaccine. We'll also learn keys to successfully embedding clinical trials into clinical practice, the theme of our conference. Dr. Corey.
I'm worried I'm not going to live up to those expectations, but anyway, I hope this is useful to you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here. So I'm going to start just with this statement that clinical research is not a nice to have. It drives long-term improvements in care quality and efficiency, and that's really what led our government to invest large amounts of money in infrastructure to support clinical trials within our health service. And I'm going to unpack some of this work in due course. But it was this success of developing this infrastructure that enabled us to then make the most of this and reap the rewards during the COVID period. And we've heard about the fact that a huge amount of COVID research was undertaken in that first wave and this first year or two. And I just thought we'd just show you this very brief YouTube video. It's not got any sound, which is a shame. Oh, there we are. So yeah, it's great, and we all are very proud of that. But what I want to do is explain a little bit about how we got there, and from a cancer perspective, and also what we've been doing since then. Pre-COVID. So in the cancer world, back in 2000, we recognised that cancer outcomes were very poor in the UK. We were lots of publications, and we were very low on the outcomes level in comparison with our international colleagues. Very few patients entered clinical trials at that time. So we as a clinical community spoke with the government, and the government agreed to take a risk and invest a limited amount of money aimed at improving the capacity to undertake clinical trials within our NHS system. And this would correlate and complement the work within what was then the National Cancer Research Institute, which were groups of multidisciplinary teams of individuals who were working to develop clinical studies. And there was funding there from government, research councils, and charities and industry. And the NCRN was a huge success. The initial aim was to double recruitment of cancer patients in clinical trials within the first 3 years, and that was achieved. And on the left-hand side, you can see a map of England. Each of those little coloured sections is a research network. One of them, if you know England, there's a black spot in Cambridge, and I led the development of our research network that 20 years ago. And you can see on the right-hand side how recruitment just picked up very quickly year on year. So baseline of 5%, within 3 years, up to 12% and beyond. And what was the success? The success was the government handing over tranches of money to clinical teams to do with what they wanted to an extent. And that new research funding made a big difference. And what we were doing, to a large extent, for example, in my patch, Cambridge is where I'm based, is an academic university institution. We have quite a lot of resources, but we're networked around a series of other hospitals that had very little in the way of resources, but a lot of patients. And we were able to put this funding into these additional hospitals. And the key resource that was effective were the research nurses and practitioners. So people who were supporting the clinicians to run those trials and supporting the patients to get them into the studies and maintain them on trial. And that success did not go unnoticed. And as Francois was mentioning, in 2006, the National Institute for Health Research was born. And this now encompassed a whole series of research topic-specific networks, one of which was cancer, but now crossing all conditions and coordinated through 25 comprehensive local research networks. In 2014, there was a bit of restructuring that happened. From those 25 research networks, we decided, or it was decided that that was too complex. It would be easier to use bigger footprints, and the numbers were reduced to larger networks, and 15 in total. And then NIHR is now quite a major beast in itself. It does more than just run and support research networks. We have a strapline, which is to improve the health and wealth of the nation through research. And this is achieved through funding high-quality, timely research, investing in expertise, facilities, and workforce, training our researchers, partnering with patients and carers, collaborating with public funders, charities and industry, and also funding global health research. The research networks are the part that actually support the participation of patients in trials. And in 2022, in fact, we changed our name from NIHR, which is specifically health research, to include social care, recognizing that this wider area that was very much evident through the pandemic. So the clinical research networks, which you can see sort of almost at the bottom there, focus really on delivering mainly phase 2-3 multi-center trials. But there are various other networks and resources that we have. So we have the biomedical research centers that support translational research. We have experimental cancer medicine centers that focus on early phase trials. And in total, there's about 0.5 billion pounds that is put in by government to support that infrastructure. So that's just under $1 billion Canadian dollars, something like that. We have medical directorate leadership. Our medical director is Nick Lemoyne, who is based at Barts in London. And under him, some deputy directors and the national specialty leads. So in cancer trials make up about a quarter of the portfolio. Portfolio's got 4,500 trials in it. So there are 6 specialty leads for cancer, myself leading for late phase international studies, but we have leadership for early phase, for surgery, for radiotherapy, for screening, prevention and early diagnosis, which we've added recently because we feel that's really important, and somebody leading for children and young people's cancers. So these people are overseeing various parts of a very large portfolio. And underneath us, within those regions, we have subspecialty leads who have leadership and responsibility for overseeing, for example, breast cancer, lung cancer, colon cancer, SPED, various other parts of the portfolio. And these guys meet virtually about quarterly for an hour with ourselves and really just have that oversight of the portfolio and can, for example, troubleshoot, can have a conversation with chief investigators as as new key studies enter the portfolio, and also talk about the end product. If a study is completed, there's a conversation there to be had as what is the impact? Is this relevant for changing practice, and should we be talking to our commissioners, etc.? So pre-COVID, we thought we were in a really great position of strength. We had the NCRI, which was responsible primarily for developing our academic portfolio. We had the NIHR, responsible for delivering it. We had good relationships with our patients, our carers, our charities. But then, of course, something bad happened. And on the one hand, there was a fantastic response. We've heard already how the UK really led a lot of the research around COVID treatment and prevention. There was an urgent public health programme set up. Everything was fast-tracked, and it was pretty impressive. And by the end of that year, over 500,000 people had actually participated in some form of COVID research. And you can see a picture of Prince William there. I don't know if you can recognise him, and getting his vaccine, obviously a product of all that research. But the UK is a public-funded, resource-limited healthcare system. So I think the COVID guys won in that discussion. Everybody else took a hit. So, for example, our staff, both clinicians, service research nurses, were all being redeployed to support the service work and the research work associated with COVID-19. And in my clinic, for example, in the oncology clinics, our priority was to reduce footfall, maximize patient safety, protect health service resources. So patients were no longer coming into our clinic. We were telephoning them, we were video calling them. And that's really not easy when you're trying to deal with clinical trial protocols. So not surprisingly, if you look at the data from our clinical trial activity, you can see this massive dip in the spring of 2020. And literally the portfolio outside of COVID came to an abrupt halt for a number of months. And it's taken a heck of a lot of work to actually restart that and catch up. I'm glad to say we're pretty much nearly there, but it's been a lot of hard work. So I think the important thing is that what we have been doing is reflecting on the positives, the negatives of the COVID experience and how we need to do things differently moving forward. We need to move on into that new era of precision medicine, and we need to make sure that we continue to make an impact on clinical practice and outcomes for our patients. So there were two important white papers that were published post-COVID from the Department of Health. And the first one focused very much on the strategy for our research programme in the UK. And of these, the first one was about building on learning from the research response to COVID-19 and support the recovery of health and the health and social care system. And the second important paper was very much about how that impacted on delivering our research in our healthcare system. And again, the two key priorities to focus on there was that clinical research should be embedded in the NHS, very much about what you're talking about, and to be patient-centred. So what I'm going to do is sort of work through just 5 key change initiatives that have been taking up a lot of our time and thinking since the pandemic. So firstly, to talk about underserved communities. Secondly, to think about study and site readiness to support research across all communities. Thirdly, to think about the research workforce. Fourth, patient partnership. And fifth, equity of access. So underserved communities. So we've got a big program around this. It's called Include, which stands for Innovations in Clinical Trial Design and Delivery for the Underserved. And if you go onto the NHR website and search for these things, you can find all sorts of useful tools and information and guidelines. And the important points, I guess, are that in our trials and our vaccine studies, we found that underserved groups were reluctant to sign up and take part. The COVID pandemic highlighted the importance of making sure research studies are truly diverse, and we need to ensure that research studies are inclusive of all our communities. So the Include team did a lot of stakeholder engagement with patients, the public, funders, clinicians, researchers, regulators, industry, policymakers, and came up with this roadmap with a lot of advice and thoughts in this area. And I'm just going to talk about a few of them. For example, we need to first of all get a grip on, what do we mean? Who are our underserved groups? And there are a variety of these. So we can think about it in terms of demographics, the extremes of very young, very old people, ethnicity, sexual orientation. We can think about social economics factors. People who are fully employed actually struggle to enter clinical trials. We have a gypsy community. How are we going to enter them into clinical trials? Religion, language barriers, health status, people with mental health problems, learning disability, visual, hearing impairment, how do we get them into our clinical trials? And in cancer, thinking about disease-specific groups, we have rare cancers, we have genetic subtypes, we have patients with brain mets that are constantly excluded from protocols, and poor performance status patients who make up quite significant cohorts of our patients. Why is it important? Well, we need our results of our trials to be generalizable to a broad population. We know that different groups of patients may respond differently because of their physiology or disease state. We need to make sure that clinicians have evidence across the board. Otherwise, we end up not being able to offer treatment to some patients, either because of reluctance or actually because we're not allowed to, because it's not licensed in a particular patient group. And clinical opinion could take place of evidence. And this sort of little principle, which I'm not sure whether you're familiar with, but very much it is being captured in the UK, is this no decision about me without me. And if we keep that in the forefront, then again, we need to be making sure that we are delivering on all our patient needs. There are lots of barriers that we need to understand in order to find solutions, and these are just some of them. I'm not going to go through them all, but we do find that there are groups of patients because of culture or deprivation that do not trust the healthcare system and therefore will struggle ever to enter clinical trials. There are financial impacts related to trials. There are burdensome, complex trial requirements. How many of you now are dealing with 30-page patient information leaflets? I just find that crazy. So lots of things that we need to be thinking about. And therefore, we then need to be translating that into the guys who are setting up the research. So as a researcher, to be very clear who is the patient population that you're interested in, and to write your inclusion and exclusion criteria to reflect that. Our funders, if they receive applications, is to think about the study population versus the population who live with that condition. Is the application making reference to differences and considering that in their application? And the funders can actually set up calls specifically to commission research in particular areas should they wish to. And in terms of research delivery, we need to be very clear when we get that protocol who might be the underserved people for that protocol and what are the likely barriers and what are we going to be doing proactively to encourage a diverse group of people to enter those studies. So this kind of complements work around study and site readiness to support research across all the communities. And I'm going to briefly talk about remote trial delivery, decentralized trials, efficient trial designs. We've heard some about that already, but just to demonstrate that we're all thinking in the same way. So my colleague Camille Carroll is a neurologist in Plymouth, and she has done a lot of work in this area. Again, on the website, there's some tools here around remote trial delivery, by which we mean all activities related to clinical trial delivery undertaken without in-person, face-to-face contact. They do not need always to come to clinic. And the work here has been to try and think through the whole trial journey from the very start, the site initiation, the counselling and informing patients and consenting them, the monitoring, the drug dispensing, and finishing off and closing out that trial. And Camille has led a series of surveys and meetings and workshops to really start unpacking what are the benefits, what are the risks with remote trial delivery, and how do we need to express this and then implement it in our practice. Another piece of a publication which is, I would draw your attention to is from a colleague, Gary Doherty, who was working in Cambridge during the COVID pandemic in the early phase environment and struggling to be able to recruit his patients into the trials, which made him focus on looking more carefully and deeply at those clinical trial protocols, mainly of which are industry sponsored. And realizing that there's so much redundancy in those protocols, so many tasks that were really not terribly meaningful. So, for example, requiring a physical examination for every clinic visit, mandating those patients to come to the hospital. Why do we have to do that all the time? Is that information really ever utilized? And so nowadays, that has been addressed by a targeted physical examination, for example, keeping the patients out into the community as much as possible and bringing them in only if they need to be there. We're not the only people working in this space. This is some data from the European Medicines Agency, again, very interested in decentralized trials. And the little figure here is not to be read in detail, but what comes out, I hope strikes you, is the traffic light, green and red changes here. And this is some data around the question of could the IMP be delivered to patients at home? And all those reds were basically no, for all sorts of different reasons. So again, if we're really putting the patient at the center, can we change that situation and turn all those red boxes green? So the opportunities there are quite clear. If we can be more patient-centered, we can improve recruitment and retention, we can generate diversity, flexibility, efficiency, and begin to innovate in our clinical trial design. There are lots of challenges. I'm not going to go through these in detail. Some things like unintended consequences, issues around retraining our workforce, and lots of things that can all be addressed if we wish to and make the effort. Efficient trial designs. The recovery trial is such a platform trial, a trial where you can start with a single protocol, bring in new arms, drop arms through amendments and so on. It's a very efficient way of setting up a trial and avoiding all those long, painful setup processes. These have been around a long time. In cancer, we've been using them pre-COVID. In the UK, academic studies using the platform design include the STAMPEDE prostate trial, lung matrix, Focus 4 in colorectal cancer. They're lovely studies to draft as protocols. They are complex and problematic to fund, but again, they are things that we need to be thinking about. So to talk about a bit about the workforce, we talked about equity, diversity and inclusion for patient recruitment. We also need to think about that in the workplace as well. And there's been some work done here to make sure that we are recruiting people who reflect the whole population. We educate them, train them, and promote them appropriately. To take note of that. The other area we've been doing a lot of work in is really just raising the training opportunities for people around clinical trials. We have, in NHR, we have a whole section called NHR Learn, which is an opportunity for people to self-learn. Lots and lots of little modules of varying sizes, some 10 minutes, some up to an hour, in various aspects of clinical trial activity that you can go on and just do as and when you want to and refresh yourself or progress or learn about something new. We also think it's really important that everybody needs to have some basic limited knowledge of how we are recruiting patients within our embedded system, within our healthcare system. And the Associate Principal Investigator Scheme addresses this. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in just a minute. But for those people who want to go beyond that basic level of training, we've got a program called an Integrated Academic Training Program where people can develop those skills to become chief investigators and learn how to write grants and secure their much more focused academic career. So the Associate PI scheme was actually developed by a group of surgeons in the surgical training program, they are required to have a tick against having done some form of research. And actually not many surgeons actually engage in laboratory research or formal clinical research, MDs, PhDs, this kind of thing. So they came up with this idea that it would be really good for the surgeons, for the trainees, to get a limited amount of experience in conducting clinical trials. And this has been so successful that it has been progressed across the whole NHR program. So what it comprises of is a 6-month in-work training opportunity to provide practical experience for health and care professionals starting their research career. So this started with surgical and then medical trainees. It's now available for nurses, for physiotherapists, any other allied healthcare professionals. And the aim is to work alongside a PI. So the PI is expected to support and mentor the trainee, and for the trainee to get involved in all aspects of that trial within that 6 months. And that might be an investigator meeting, the recruitment of those patients in clinic, counselling them, consenting them, working with the research nurses, and then at the end of the 6 months, hopefully training up their successor who might take over in their institution. And this is all certified now, so individuals who do this get a formal certification through the NHR and their college, their training college, whether that's Royal College of Physicians, Surgeons, Physiotherapists, etc. And this system was used very effectively for the COVID period, and in the recovery trial, a large proportion of patients were recruited by APIs. And a survey of them was done at the end of December, and you can see here some of the feedback that we got. So on the left-hand side, you can see that those APIs were recruiting at least 20 patients in a relatively short period of time. They all felt really supported, and most of them had very much gained enthusiasm for research and said they would definitely be continuing to be engaged in research afterwards. So comments came back like, excellent scheme, fantastic opportunity. This is the first time I have been able to understand the process of NHS research, so hands-on experience that makes a difference, using those learning skills and applying things like GCP. So really productive, very simple scheme, costs very little to run. And here you can see in the cancer portfolio a whole series of those studies, and each of those bars represents associate PIs currently working on individual studies. So the patients, of course, really, really important. And again, we've been doing a lot of work to really build that relationship with patients and carers. The program that we have is called Be Part of Research. We have a number of trial finders, most of which are very much focused at professionals to help them find clinical trials for patients, and the ECMC trial finder is one of these. But what Be Part of Research is trying to do is it's trying to give back the power to the patients so that they can actually interrogate the database of trials and try and identify a study near them that might be suitable, and therefore try and match them up in some productive way. And also there's an opportunity for them to volunteer, to make themselves available for future research. So they can actually put their details and a few limited bits of personal information onto the database so that they are available to be contacted should a relevant study be coming along. And by 2021, we had about 1.4 million people just registered as potential volunteers ready to take part in research should they should the right protocol come along. In cancer specifically, over the years, a guy called Richard Stevens has done a fabulous job building up an advocate forum. And this provides training and education for advocates and a support network to keep them all feeling like a community. And through this network, our advocates are very much, I guess I remember thinking this is just going to be a tick box exercise when it all started, but it's absolutely not now. We have advocates who are involved as genuine applicants on grant applications alongside academics. They sit on funding committees, so there's always a box on the applications asking about the patient element. They are engaged in trial management groups, so overseeing the studies from a patient perspective. And through this, their value has enabled them to actually influence health service improvement, so they do get asked to advise on commissioning of care, introduction of new treatments, and really making a difference to our healthcare. Final one, equity of access. We are interested in developing tools, very much as Françoise was talking about earlier, to look at how we might influence our portfolio. And we call these geomaps. And what we're doing is we're trying to tie up our trial data, we have a central portfolio management system, with other national data sets. So if you look here in the middle, that's a map of England, and those different colours represent cancer prevalence. So the darker the colour, the more prevalent cancer is. On the left-hand side, each of those dots represents a hospital running clinical trials. The darkness, or the lightness, represents the numbers of patients that are recruited. The nice dark spot in the relative bottom is Cambridge, that's us. But you can see most of them are relatively low volume recruitment. But what you can also see, if you have a look at that top bit of England, the north, and you compare that on the left-hand graph, you can see that discrepancy. So somehow we need to understand what is the problem. Is that about workforce? Is that about training? How can we try and put trials up in that northern area so that we can actually facilitate recruitment of all those patients who currently are missing out big time? And on the right-hand side, you can see the other kind of criteria that we can start looking at. We can start breaking that data down by cancer type. We can look at comorbidities. We can look at ethnicity and so on. So lots of questions that we can start asking and hopefully trying to influence our trial portfolio going forward. So going forward, heading towards the end of my talk now. Key partnerships. We are interested in real-world data, and NHS Digital is our national data set. There's a lot of work that we need to do to improve communication and access to that data, but it is definitely an increasing priority for us. And the other key priority is our partnership with industry. We see industry as being an opportunity for getting state-of-the-art treatment for our patients. We also see that there are funding opportunities there. So our clinical trials have what we call capacity build associated with them, and we use that funding to resource our research nurse, data manager, our trial infrastructure, so that we can continue to build our programs. And the two companies we've been developing a relationship with at the moment have been Moderna and BioNTech, the guys who developed the mRNA vaccine technology. And we've had two deals that have been brokered this last year to try and build the vaccine trial programs in the UK. And what they're interested in are those networks that I've talked about before, the experimental cancer medicine centres to deliver our early phase studies, the regional research delivery networks to deliver our later phase studies, and the expectation is that we will be able to deliver these trials much more efficiently than other countries. And our hope is that we will be the best place globally to do vaccine research, and the interest is in infectious diseases, continuing to build on the COVID program, cancer and rare diseases. Now, vaccines for cancer are not the same thing as vaccines for COVID, as I'm sure you're aware. Every cancer is different, and the difference here is that we're trying to build, or the companies are building personalised vaccines. This has come at a good time in the UK. We've been in the business of building our genomics capability in order to be able to respond effectively to the variety of approved, commissioned studies for molecular subtypes of cancer patients. So on the right-hand side there, that is a little map of what we call our genomics laboratory hubs that cover the country and provide a service for molecular profiling. And now what we're doing is we're actually utilising that same system for a research programme. And NHS England is leading in this area. The picture is Peter Johnson. He's a great ally of ours. He came out of Cancer Research UK and is now the clinical director in NHS England, very research focused. And the goal here is to set up what he's described as a cancer vaccines launch pad. So any patient who is going to have their cancer surgery, so it's primary cancer surgery here, will be consented to share their data, the tissue and a blood sample, and generate libraries that will be available in our genomics hubs for those companies to be able to come and pick off the right patients to deliver their vaccine trials efficiently. And this is actually happening in real life in the first pilot study using the scheme. This is a BioNTech trial in adjuvant colorectal cancer. Rob Jones is a surgeon based in Liverpool, and he's leading on this study. On the left-hand side, you can see the schema of the flow, the workflow of the CVLP, where those patients are coming in, having their surgery, samples being collected. And they would be the equivalent of the level 2 hubs on the right-hand side. This is a map of Merseyside. And so the surgery is done there. And then the idea is that those patients who are potentially relevant for the trial will be referred on to the level 2 centre, which is where the actual cancer vaccine trial has opened. So we're hoping that that is going to be effective. It's just starting and being met very positively. There's a whole load of these cancer vaccine trials that are opening up. We're discovering all sorts of issues around how these studies how these agents are viewed by regulatory organizations, and how pharmacies have to deal with them. So lots of challenges, but I think we will all be addressing them. So some of these studies are sponsored by Moderna and BioNTech. Others, it's a big program with MSD, is partnering and sponsoring a whole series of adjuvant trials with the Moderna personalized vaccine. And I suspect there will be some centers in Canada that will be involved. Hope so. And again, just going back to the GeoMap, here we can look at our data as the vaccine trials roll out. On the left-hand side, we can see where those trials are being conducted, and on the right-hand side, how many patients are being recruited at those sites. So again, trying to monitor the information and think strategically. We have a problem in the UK, is that all our companies always think London is the only place that do clinical trials, and our job is to say, no, the England is a bit bigger than London, and push some of those trials particularly up to the north and into our devolved nations as well. So, in summary, there's a couple of articles just to draw your attention to, but really, obviously, reform is ongoing. We need to work on our approvals process. We have a weak link with our setup times, and that was picked out by an ABPI report last year, and was being addressed through the Lord O'Shaughnessy review. We need to think about how we improve our informed consent, our trial procedures, data design, and thinking about portfolio visibility so that we can actually make sure that both clinicians and patients have an opportunity to know what's out there and get in on the action, really. Key to successful embedding of clinical trials into clinical practice: learn from the COVID pandemic, be inclusive, decentralized, design trials smartly, protect, promote, grow your workforce, train the next generation of researchers. Listen to industry. Sometimes they give us a hard time, but it's worth listening to them. And very, very much partner with our patients and advocates. And I'm going to stop there.
Please, Francois.
Congratulations, a great talk and inspiring, and it's reassuring to know you're still finding things to improve upon. So my question is, or could you describe or explain a little bit further in the first slides when you were describing the NIHR and the sort of not the algorithm, but the governance of it, and the specialty groups, and then the regional and the relative weight or importance or roles and responsibilities of individuals in those boxes in terms of career researcher versus on-the-ground clinicians and PPIs, or people with lived experience, as we would call them here. Because, and then I'll maybe follow up with a comment.
Yeah. I would say most of what I have described has been very much led by clinicians who are doing research. So they are NHS, they are service bodies, consultants who love doing research. And I think cancer, by the nature of the area in which we work, it has always been very research orientated. These are clinicians doing research. Now, some of those posts, so for example, at the senior level, they are recognized by NIHR and funded. So I have a day a week that I work funded. When it gets down to regional level, the allocation of funding is very much determined within region. And it's very interesting to see how that has been allocated. And some reimburse and some don't reimburse for clinical time. And I think, in a way, people have got away with it for a long time, relying on the fact that people are passionate about cancer research. Because, I was saying earlier, because of the pressures of our service environment now, and the complexity and the time that it takes to undertake research, those pressures are now too big. And so some of the work that we need to be doing around the workforce is actually protecting research time for those NHS consultants. So the academic researchers tend to be, with the greatest of respect, not hugely altruistic. They have their own agenda. They have a very different focus. And so if we relied on them, we wouldn't get very far.
So, and just as a follow-up comment, and because what gets lost in the translation, from like when you cross the pond, and is because we hear NIHR and we sort of, think CIHR, but the huge difference, and personally, on this side of the pond, as a researcher, in the clinical world, you're a little bit of an outsider, and you have to go on your hands and knees and buy the coffee and the donut and beg and to convince people on the ground who are actually seeing more patients than I am to participate. And on the other side, it was very much the opposite. We were being approached by clinicians and we were held accountable to the specialty group. They just happened to like the question and like the study I was leading, but I was reporting to them. They, on the ground, clinicians, paid. So it's NHS. Initially when you said, you got extra money for this, the CRNs, were not beasts of the research community. These were networks set up in and set up by the health system. So it's almost as if all of a sudden, and that's how I lose so many friends, but advocating for this, it's almost as if you are giving research money to the clinicians, to the hospitals to set up their own shop, not as we've heard a little bit earlier, using research money to pay for coordinator roles who will be hired by non-hospital staff.
So I think it's co-production. Going back to 2000 when we put in our bid for that first research network, I did it with a manager. So I'm not a manager, and it's going back to that thing, you need to know what you're good at. I've got the clinical vision and the understanding of what I want to see from a clinical researcher, but I don't know how to manage. I also set up a clinical trials unit from scratch, because I realized that, you had to start from somewhere. So I think the money has primarily been used to fund the infrastructure, not clinicians. Research nurses, data managers, trial coordinators, tissue people who are dealing with all the tissue issues. So the money is definitely not coming into the hands of clinicians, but they are really leading on the decision making, and then the management has been facilitating their vision, and it just so happened that I think it's worked. It's certainly, I would say that obviously I know the Cancer Network better than the others. I think it's worked there because we've always been a very tight-knit community. I think some of the others work, to different degrees of success, some better than others. And I think ITU is a success story. Again, a relatively small community that works very well together. You should never underestimate the role of the clinicians. As I was telling you earlier, that there is a restructuring going on in the NIHR, so I don't want to sort of be too despondent, but there is a slight worry that I have that they will be actually taking out some of our clinical leadership at various different levels, so that actually, a network that is just full of managers is not going to really deliver. So there are some concerns out there, some risks, I would say, that we need to mitigate and watch carefully.
We'll take two final questions and then one.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you, Pippa. That was excellent to listen to. My name is Linda Hunter, and I'm a patient co-investigator for a CIHR-funded clinical trials training platform called CanTrain. My questions are specifically, and I happen to be an ex-nurse, and you're never, you're in the healthcare world, never out of it. My patient questions are, number one, does the research granting body have a percentage of grants that are given out that have to have a patient co-investigator? If yes, what is that percent? Are patients trained in clinical trial training to the level of actually getting some type of certification that indicates they can be a patient research fellow, for example, like UPADI does in Europe? And from that perspective, are your researchers also trained in truly understanding patient engagement in research to understand that it goes beyond participation in satisfaction, but participation in recruiting? So I'm just wondering if you explained some of it, but if you could explain a bit more just to see how advanced it is or where it's at.
Yeah. I don't think there's actually a quota in the way that you said at the very beginning. But it's very much encouraged, and there are some different funding streams where the expectation will be higher. So we have one NIHR funding stream called Research for Patient Benefit. I think if you were to submit an application to that funding stream without a patient or an advocate of some description on your list of co-applicants, I think that would be really a big, black mark, to be honest. So we're not that prescriptive. There is, but it is always considered. And as I said, there is always a representative on the grant application committee, and the comments back from the patient representative are taken very seriously. So I think it is a valued role. In terms of training of advocates, there's quite a lot out there, and it is done at various different levels. In cancer, we have had the opportunity to do some of that work separately, because I think it's been, I think we have led the way to actually raise the profile of the advocate. And there is a plan to try and fund an academy that would actually formalize and certify the role. In terms of training the investigators, I think, again, it's kind of drip feeding. As I say, we've been at this in cancer for 20 plus years, 25 years. And in the old days, it did feel a bit like a tick box exercise. And then people began to realize that actually there's a lot more to it than that. And most of us have realized the benefits. So I think, and people who are reviewing applications can see through. If you're literally just using your advocate to write the patient information leaflet, for example, it's pretty obvious. So there is an expectation that you identify what that person, every co-applicant, what are they actually doing? So I think we are far more open and understanding of the role, and certainly all our key groups, our specialty groups, all have patient representation on them, and there's always that risk. So a lot of our patient reps are linked to charities, and charities have their own agendas. So we do have to be a little bit careful there to understand exactly where they are coming from. And also, we do have professional patients who, very much are out there for their own view. So balancing all these things together, I think we have made a lot of progress. We do have a well-documented guidelines in terms of payment for patient advocates for their time, whereas, I wouldn't necessarily, if I go to a meeting, I'm not expected to get paid. The time that an advocate attends a meeting will be reimbursed. So there are things like that we think, traveling if they're traveling and that sort of thing. So I think we are as proactive as we possibly can be without literally defining quotas, as you said at the beginning.
Hi. It struck me that there is such this tight integration and dependence on the health service. But I was wondering if you could describe the formal structures that exist to allow that alignment to occur. I mean, there is a part of this which is the research infrastructure you described, and that's presumably through some granting. But then the priority setting and the alignment to what the actual practice that's going on. So if people are waiting a year to see a specialist in a center, well then, you've missed your opportunity for anything really. So how is the health service and the health research communities coming together to align with what people in the community are actually facing?
So that is a genuine tension. So we have the Department of Health and Social Care, and under that we have NHR for research, and then we have NHS England that is overpinning that manages the service. Now, I would say pre-COVID, they were completely separate. There was very little communication between the two at all. COVID has changed that, and ever since then, we have a bi-monthly meeting with our NHS. So NHS England now has an R&D department, and we liaise with them on a regular basis, and we share information, and we identify problems and tensions and areas that we think they need to address within their end, and they're learning from us as well. So I think we are building that relationship, but it's absolutely not going to solve waiting lists.
Selfishly, I'm saving the last question for myself, actually, because it's been a theme, I think, that's come up in a number of conversations this morning, and I'm going to call it healthcare consumerism. And the idea is that as patient engagement expands, the voice of the consumer, the voice of the patient is introduced into the process. You've had two campaigns, one for recovery and one for, I believe, be part of research. And I just wondered about the strategic thinking on baking in awareness building, expanding the value of research, engaging patients through what I'll call classic marketing.
Yeah.
How is that part of the thinking?
So I talked about, we've got this huge portfolio of, in total, over 4,000 trials. And we have the same problem that has been mentioned earlier about completing recruitment. And one of the goals that has been our mantra is recruitment to time and target. And we haven't achieved that from the clinical perspective, from the investigator perspective. And so I think, maybe dragging and kicking and screaming, we have got to the point when actually we need to move that power into the hands of the consumers. So I think that's what the thinking is there. We know that it's difficult enough for clinicians in one of those hospitals that isn't very research active. How do they know what are the current trials? We all know the minutiae of the entry criteria. We know the effort that it takes to refer a patient, and if you're referring the patient and they're not eligible, everybody gets upset and disappointed. So managing all those expectations it is a problem. But underneath all that, if the clinicians don't have the information, they're never going to be able to refer those patients. But if the patients don't even have that information, they're never going to be able to ask their clinician to be referred for a trial. And we hear that a lot, how, because the clinicians are now very, very busy, research is falling down their priority, but a lot of patients, maybe through COVID, now have research, they're thinking about research in a positive way. Whereas, maybe pre-COVID, a lot of it was kind of, well, I'm just a human guinea pig here. I think there's a positive spin. And so giving back the power to the patients and developing tools where they can do the searching and they can be empowered to ask about referrals and so on, I think is really the thinking there.
Yeah, thank you. And I believe that's part of the future. Can everyone join me, please, in thanking Dr. Corey?